Okay, we're live. Welcome everybody to this DevShop marketing briefing. Glad you're here. Frank, thank you. I want to particularly welcome you, our guest expert for today. A little bit of context on why Frank's here. My radar is always out for people who have something to teach, particularly something that's based on a real actual success story. Frank emailed me once with two things. One was a question about positioning. That's not really relevant here. The other was him saying, oh, by the way, I've been so successful with content marketing that, people Google for Rails security expert. They find me and they're like trying to hop on a plane next thing you know to come out and meet us and hire us. I said, okay, that sounds to me exactly like the dream that people have when they think about content marketing. And so I invited Frank to do this. He agreed graciously to put together a presentation and just explain how he did it. It's, he'll warn you, it's not like you can just copy exactly what he did and get the same kind of success. There's some probably unique aspects about his situation. But I think what he's going to tell you about content marketing is going to be very relevant, very transferable information for anybody who is interested in making use of content marketing to find clients. So that's why Frank is here. We actually met, aside from communicating over email, for the first time yesterday. And I'm as excited, I think, as anybody else is about hearing Frank's presentation. So I think that's enough context for why you're here. As you'll know from the emails where I announced this event, I'm really interested in you asking questions because I see this as an opportunity to, learn some stuff that, basically learn from Frank's experience. So please do ask questions. We won't do like interrupt Frank style questions. We'll do save your questions for the end. So if you want to drop those into chat as a sort of reminder to yourself, that's fine. And if you want to just wait to the end and then just kind of raise your hand, which you can do digitally through the Zoom meeting software, and let me know that you have a question, I'll kind of queue it up and just let you ask your question directly to Frank. So Frank, sound good? You're muted, sir.
Yeah, I've had to. Okay, so I was
we
looking
could
where
try to read your lips.
the unmute is. I do have one thing to correct slightly.
Okay,
that would
go
be
ahead.
the dream. It's usually the other way, but it's still very good. It's interactions, and then they want to book me a flight to come to their team.
Got it.
I haven't really had so many people trying to come. I've had people drive from out of town, though, so maybe we're about half there.
Okay, that's pretty close. So thank you for that. Still, for most people, that would be a dramatic improvement over the status quo for them. So why don't you, Frank, take it away and kind of tell us how you accomplished that. I will, I'm going to mute myself and you have the floor for basically as long as you need it.
Can I actually poll the audience real quick for a second before we get started?
I think that'd be lovely.
Okay, so I just wanted a sense for, so I'm a developer. Like I spend time writing code and I'm a security consultant. So I spend time talking to people about security stuff. Where is everyone at right now? Are most people working in development shops and this is kind of like a funnel thing? Or are you just getting started and you're like, wow, internet marketing, yeah, I have to do it. Like, where's everyone at? Or sample?
Let's see. Why don't folks drop a response into chat?
How do I see that chat, by the way, Philip?
Oh, look on the bottom and the bottom sort of toolbar, and there'll be a button that brings up the chat window.
More, because I'm presenting my screen, I don't really have a bottom.
Stop sharing your screen and it'll be, Zoom kind of suppresses all that stuff when you're sharing your screen.
Ah, I see.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Okay, so now I'll go back to a screen share.
Yeah. Everybody can you reiterate that question? Dan, Frank was just checking in. Basically, where are you at with your business? What are you wanting to get out of content marketing? So Dan says solo e-commerce design, dev consultant, should be doing more content marketing, and notice that should.
Yeah, I should floss and do TDD all the time as well.
William, freelancer for 6 years, hiring a team, developer, small team, currently remote.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'll work through the planned presentation, and feel free to type the things because I really do want to dive into questions ultimately. Okay. Let me go back to my screen share for this window, and awesome. So everyone, my name is Frank Rietta. I am 34 years old. I'll be 35 a little bit later. And I have been programming since I was about 14. Literally woke up one day and said, programming is awesome. I want to learn how to do that. Went and got a book from the library. We still went to places like libraries then. Actually, it's a funny story. The only thing I was before the internet, before I had access to the internet, there was the internet. We had a modem on our 46, but I was only allowed to dial into the library's computer system. And so I thought that was cool. I was young. My parents didn't let me go to BBSs. And so started with GW Basic and then taught myself QBasic. One thing led to another, and eventually I did the whole computer science degree and so forth. But I love programming, which is odd because now I'm talking about marketing. The reason for that is I've never had a job. Well, that's not completely true because I did have a paycheck from the university at one point for a period of time. But other than that, I've always had a business. Starting, I think I was 11, I started cutting grass, made some money. By about 13 or so, I was making like $4K a summer. And I got the bug. Then when I got into computers, it was very natural for me to start a web hosting business, to start a development business. Well, I had the whole college thing. And then to sell the web hosting business and be like, I'm going to make apps and work on that. And then just one thing has always led to another. And I've never been in a position where I needed to stop what I was doing and seek employment elsewhere. So that's kind of where I am at. So the name of, let's see, there's more chat to everybody. Anyway, okay. So what we're going to talk about here is this is the internet marketing for it's the long game. According to Phillips taxonomy, I am in a position that's called a horizontal expert. That means that I'm doing something as a service that is applicable to across industries. So it's not like I just work with car manufacturers or IoT manufacturers. What I do impacts people in many things. This is a little bit like being a doctor. So if someone is searching for a doctor for a condition, it's not like a type of person needs your services, but someone who has that condition would love your services if that's something you're specialized in. I'm not an SEO, so this is not what I do professionally. And my experience is maybe unique to myself. I've had a website since I was a teenager. It's built upon itself. So there may be aspects that are unique there. And then I don't believe that I've made it. I'm not fabulously wealthy yet, or I haven't sold a company for $20 million, nothing like that. So total transparency, giving this talk, I'm like, wow, I would really like to hear that talk. Oh, I'm the one giving it. So I'm going to talk about from the basis of what I've done and what I probably will continue to do. And then we can have a discussion about how that could apply to you. So the next slide is being number one is good. Can everyone see my screen, by the way? It's changed around a little bit.
Yeah, can you make it full screen? I think we'll get a bigger picture
Awesome.
if you go.
How about now?
That's much better. Thanks.
Awesome. So if you type this into Google now, generate OpenSSL key, you will discover the most visited page on my website. It was a blog post I wrote because it was something of interest. And so that's an example of a top ranking for something that is not a term that involves my name or some locality, but is of general interest. there's another important phrase that represents a real need for my customers. And you'll notice that of this result, my site, my content is 3 of the top 5 results. So once upon a time, there was this awesome cartoon from the New Yorker. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. It's a great cartoon, and this may have been true at some point. When I was much younger, I actually got work when I was a teenager from Cox Business Services and Verizon Wireless at the same time, doing some PHP stuff. But nowadays, this is not so true. Customers are much more savvy, and they background check by searching and asking their social networks for proof of your bona fides. So this little saying, sell someone a fish and he or she will compare you to other fish sellers. Show that person how to fish and he or she may hire you anyway because you're the expert. See, they don't actually want to fish. But they do want to know that the person they're hiring to fish is actually a bona fide fisher and not a reseller of someone else's fish. Some of these concepts go quite a ways back. So this is a Bible verse that I have on our coffee mugs. I like my coffee mug. And it says, do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank. So in my point of view, there's great benefit in becoming actually excellent in your work. And by focusing, you're able to do that excellent work before you're not going to labor in obscurity. And in this sense, based upon Proverbs, this is a biblical promise in a sense. So the wisdom goes back for quite some ways. So 19 years I've been doing this sort of thing. One thing has led to another. I have had a website for at least that long. I registered Rietta.com in 1999, so that was not 19 years ago, but that was 18 years ago. And it is a continual iterative process. So we're going to talk about the long-term investment mindset, momentum, fundamentals of content discovery. I'm going to keep on harping on discoverability. So if you have social proof, that's wonderful. If you have discoverable social proof, that's something it's actually useful. And to formulate, test, and iterate on market hypotheses, and that my experience that my best referrals have not been from clients, and we'll talk about a little bit why, but they have been from peers in my field. Especially developers, and that referral is worth its weight in gold. And then a bit about being generous and trustworthy, and just some of my ideas upon that. So the thing with an investor's mindset is regular life teaches you that you do some amount of work and you get some amount of pay. So this is also your parent saying, congratulations, son or daughter, you have completed your academic education, and now you should go work for Microsoft, and they will pay you really well. That is of value, but if you have an investor's mindset, you don't just trade time for money, but you focus on increasing continued value over time. So to build your career and brand positioning, which Philip teaches you about, is a continual process, and it's much like financial investing. So I don't know how many people invest in mutual funds, but if you're investing in these sorts of equities, you don't want to just put a bunch of money in at once, because the market could be up really high and you just bought it at the height, or it could be down really low and you actually had a great deal, but most of the time it's not at the low and it may be at the high. So what they tell you to do is to invest consistently over time. So instead of investing $5,000 at one time, you can invest $416 a month. And so some months you buy high, some months you buy low, and on average you do much better. this is kind of a Dave Ramseyism. Wise investors never go all in. That's gambling. So if you're playing at the blackjack table and saying, I'm all in, you're either going to win big or more likely lose everything. So wise investors make multiple investments. And from a venture capital standpoint, I've heard it said that an investor is going to expect, out of 10 investments, they're going to expect 6 to fail, complete loss. They're going to expect 2 to do okay, just kind of break even, maybe a little better than break even. And they're going to expect 2 or to do well. And 1, they're hoping for that billion-dollar unicorn. And if you look at that model, the risk of the failures are offset by the chance of the success. And so on average, investment is not gambling. One thing I will say, I will mention Dave Ramsey from time to time. I'm a big fan. He teaches, he's a radio host and sells books and courses on financial stuff. I really believe that you need to order your personal financial house to be an entrepreneur. Now, you don't have to start out with a lot of money. You presumably you need to work and make money, and you need to not spend it all. And what I mean by this is, if you even have $1,000 emergency fund in the bank that you never touch, which most Americans don't have, you're able to make a lot more wise decisions, because you don't have this nagging thing in the back of the head that you have to take this deal, this money right now, or you're going to miss your rent or mortgage payment next week. So you do have to have that discipline over time, and that's a good start. This is from this book on trade leadership that came out in 2011. It's called the Momentum Theorem. It says that focused intensity over time multiplied by God equals unstoppable momentum. So in other words, if you stay focused and shed all distractions, you'll consistently over a long period of time stay in. Anyway, you build momentum. So if you start something and you stop, and you start something else and you stop, and you try something else and you stop, you are killing your momentum curve, and that's where this goes. And then Dave Ramsey talks about multiplied by God. So there's a spiritual component of the calling. You do need to believe that you are to some extent called to this avocation. Otherwise, you're likely to jump around for the convenience and the money of the day rather than staying focused long term. Momentum is hugely important. Alan Weiss is a well-known author. He has a book on $1 Million Consulting and a few others. And he attributes this effect to something he calls market gravity. These are these activities of pro bono work, networking, and writing position papers, and giving interviews, and doing all these things, and word of mouth that create a gravitational pull towards your services and your relationships. So let's talk about content discovery. So, by the way, Philip, just so you know, with this full screen, I don't see any other screen, so I don't know if anybody's asking questions in chat or anything. So just tell me if you need anything.
Will do. Thanks, Frank.
Awesome. So content discovery. So I'm hoping everyone uses Google or Bing. Discoverability is really what you're going for when you write. So if you want to make good content, which I presume we all do, you ultimately want to make content that benefits the reader. You're not writing content for a robot. However, if that content is not discoverable, then it is all for naught, because you will have very few or no readers, no visitors of your content. Two of the tools that are best is really search and social. In the pre-interview yesterday with Philip, I mentioned having written blog posts. Most of those blog posts get very few readers. I mean, maybe my mom read it and a few others, but over time, as that content is discovered, it's immensely helpful. That's why actually that blog post that I showed you early, I wrote it 5 years ago, and I update it from time to time because people keep on discovering it. So I need it to be relevant. So even though it's locked in a period of time, it's something I wrote 5 years ago, it is relevant today and worth updating. And then social is very here and in the now. So for example, I shared on Facebook that I was giving this talk today, and some friends and family were like, "That's wonderful, good job, do it," and had those likes. So that is one form of content awareness, and then the search is for the long tail. So 1 minute. So I'm going to say that there are 3 pillars of content marketing. And you can do a search in that phrase and you'll find some variations. But if we look at your website, your agency's set of websites as a lead generation machine, which it is, right? So you want someone who does not know who you are to become aware of who you are and to reach out and say hello. And then you can have a conversation. You can help them. You can say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That's really not what we do, but I have a friend who may be able to help you. Let me make that introduction." That's actually something I like to do in the business. Is I very seldom like to turn someone completely away unless they're a scam or something. I do like to be able to say, "Hey, maybe someone else is better," or "Yeah, actually, let's have a conversation." Content creation is the piece that is the hardest work of this. And it's a little bit beyond the scope of the talk, but we're going to talk about what sort of content you should have. Consistent social media presence. This is about building presence and, more importantly, trustworthiness. So you have basically, and we'll go back into this, 2 types of content. You have content that answers a question. I don't like the term sales content, but that's what it is. And then you have the content that is evidence of your bona fides. So when someone is looking into you, the content they will discover there. And then finally, discoverability via search. Again, this is back to the thing. If you only post on, say, Facebook, that's wonderful if you have a huge Facebook audience. It is not wonderful if someone who is not in your Facebook audience needs to find you in order to do work. So for our sorts of business, the normal social media marketing advice is very poor. The density of your social connections is different if you're providing an internet service than if you're providing dentistry services in a local market. So experts for real needs, so this is something I'm going to posit to you, are searched for differently than commodities. And what I mean by this is, if you go read a book on SEO, they make their bread and butter selling commodities. As much as we love our dentists, the dental services are a commodity in the sense that some dentists are certainly better than others. However, they also serve a local market. And for most of us, we don't think we have a rare dental condition and need the most expert dental surgeon in the world. We will search for that one's need more than we will search for, "Hey, I need my kid's teeth cleaned. What's a local reputable dentist who is convenient and, is nice?" That latter part is a commodity. They can make lots of money, but they're a commodity nonetheless. I don't lose sleep if I have to take kids to a different dentist, but that's true. Experts are a little different. If you're an expert, you can expect your conversion ratios to be through the roof. You don't need 100,000 readers to your blog. You need 10 people to read every page on your site because you're answering a question that is tantamount to a gift from God for them. They have a problem and they're searching for help, and you are so specific about that need that They will work through your content, and the conversion ratios will be high accordingly. So this is how I posit that people on large search for experts. The first question is the who. Who is the best? And you can fill in the blanks. They may or may not specify locality. So for example, what is the best Rails developer or Rails developer in Atlanta? However, when you have terms that are, anyway, we'll come back to that. The second step is, and this is a full stop, you will never hear from them if you don't get past the stage, is the person or service that I have discovered that I'm reading about any good? What does the internet say? So this is where you go and search for, so-and-so sucks. You look in products world, you look for reviews. In a services world, you look for evidence that this person, this company is legitimate. So for example, if I've come across a blog post and I'm not sure if this development agency is any good, I'm going to start looking for evidence. Hey, are they on Twitter? Do they have interactions? Is there YouTube videos of their people giving conference talks? What can I find on the internet about this person or this group? And if you pass that stage, if the user says, I can believe that this person, this agency is trustworthy based upon discoverable evidence that I can actually find, then I'll do the contact, which actually is interesting because if you've done all these things, well, 80%, my experience has been a very high percentage, I made up 80%, but a very high percentage of people who contact you have already made the decision to engage your services. The conversation that happens post initial contact is almost a formality of, are you available? How much is it really going to cost me? That sort of thing. And that really changes the process from a sales-driven one where your sales are reaching out and doing the contacting. So inbound, content-driven leads are very different than leads sourced in a more general or apathetic way. So let's talk about 3 types of search queries. And this is fairly well in the literature. You can search for this. You have transactional queries. These are the do. You have informational queries. This is the know. And you have navigational queries. So that's the go-to. So when your mom types PayPal to go to PayPal, that's what she's doing. That's what Google calls that sort of query. When someone wants to engage a service, they're looking for a book, they're looking for something they're going to buy right now. That's transactional. And that's where most money in advertisement and SEO is spent. It's for transactional businesses. I want to sell as many snowboards as I possibly can. How do we do SEO such that that people who want to buy snowboards discover my content? And you end up with that whole thing. And the harder one, the thing that's hard to monetize is the informational. So this is the Wikipedia, like how far away is the moon? How big is Venus? Those are examples of what's called simple know. And when Google's algorithms detect that, that's also what feeds things like your digital assistant. So Siri or Cortana will say, the moon is so far away. I probably ought to have looked that up. It's like 300-something thousand miles, if I remember from my childhood. Maybe it's 250 something. It's a lot closer than it seems. Like you think, wow, that's so far away. Informational. This is your editorial content. These are your Wikipedia pages. And I would propose to you that 80% of all your content should be in this non-monetizable stuff. And it should be in that stuff because this is what is discovered when someone goes looking for you. And if you have 25 blog posts on a topic and 3 videos of conference talks that you've given on a topic and all sorts of the only thing better would be peer-reviewed journal articles on the topic. Like you are so far separated from your competition at that point that you're not in competition with them at all. And so the transactional side of the business, this part that everyone spends so much time with, becomes much easier. Use the Search Console. It is free, and it has good recommendations about things like structured data. So this is how do you mark up your content so that some elements are filled in. Actually, I love reading schema.org and dreaming of ways that I can use that. The search analytics will show you how people are actually finding you. Of those people, how many are clicking through. So you get to see data for free that is before they hit your website. So this is information that is not in your Google Analytics or your log files. And Bing has good stuff too. I actually did find their SEO analyzer enjoyable. It pointed out a few good things. And there's other tools, Page Speed Analyzer and others. And so let's talk about your content now. Let me pause for a little bit of water, and maybe we have some questions at this point as I catch my breath.
Yeah, anybody got questions that now would be a good time to ask? You can just speak up if you do. Just unmute and fire away.
Sure, I'll go. It sounds like, I mean, you started off, developing for yourself, and now you have a team. But a lot of it, I've been looking through your website also as you've been talking, and I like the content you have and things. Do you have your team members now doing content as well for you, or is that more something that you're authoring and you kind of outsource to a team?
Right now, it is mostly me. Maybe over time that would change. I have certainly tried to get folks who've been working with me to blog over the years, and it's a very scary thing for some people. So I don't push too hard if they're not comfortable with that. But yeah, that would be the dream, right? I think some companies do say everyone has to write a blog post. But up to now, it's pretty much mostly my own work.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Other questions? Well, we've got Frank on a water break here.
I have a question. This is Brian. I'm curious. One of the things I've struggled with is symptoms versus actual problems. So writing content, providing content and answers. Like in my case, so I'm a product designer and user experience consultant, and so the tactic may be we need a better dashboard, and they may actually need a better dashboard. They may have just an overall product problem, and they assume that the dashboard not performing equals their core problem. So it's like, yeah, I could go and start writing content, and answers about better dashboard design and this type of thing, but that's really not the service that I want to sell. So I was trying to think of I know it's kind of an open-ended question. Do you have any reactions to that? Like, you probably know this from security, like you're not selling, how do I generate SSL keys? But that's a lead to show that you're an expert in the area. So maybe that's how I should be thinking about it. But I don't know, like.
In my opinion, there's really two approaches. So we're talking about my website, Rietta.com, which is more general. I have other websites like AtlantaRubyDeveloper.com, where I talk very much about, hey, we'll write Ruby code for your startup. So at some point in my mind's eye, that's how you build the business you want to build, is you have to attract the interim business that can get you there. If I were in your shoes, I would feel comfortable writing blog content about this tactical content. I wouldn't make it your service landing page, but it's something you could definitely do long form. Like, here's how this works. And it's not exactly what we do, but it's related. So if we can be of any help, contact the author. Consider also having microsites. If you don't want to mess your brand up at all with something so tactical, you can have multiple websites, and those microsites can be focused on that tactical problem rather than the strategic one that is really the vision for your company.
Right. And do you think because of you're such a broad, I would imagine your audience is probably a lot broader than what mine is because it's horizontal in nature, and Rails is such a Ruby on Rails is such a popular framework, and security is such a big problem. You can see it's a good place to be, but I'm wondering if that's proportional to how much you can rely on SEO and like public content instead of quote private content, like focusing on drip email, marketing and that type of thing, where your audience is smaller. And like, I could publish, that's even a question too, is what about republishing all of the content you're writing? And you already have I have a mailing list, and I have about 30 issues or newsletters or however you want to call it. But it's like, wow, it's all buried and for these 30 people. And it's like, maybe I could be using that to acquire more people, but it's like, it's all buried in drip and you have to be on the list to get it, but it's not necessarily secret. Like, ideas on.
I'm gonna honestly answer. I don't know.
Okay.
That's a great question. I think of my own newsletter. I'm actually terrible at newsletter writing. Some of y'all are like experts. You have engineered this, and I'm like, I have, 50, 60 people on my list, and I'm not as consistent as one should be about actually posting to that list.
Okay.
Let's get into that a little bit with. I'm sorry, Philip. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to contribute one idea there, Brian, which is for my email list. I have started taking things that go out to my email list and then essentially echoing those to the blog on my website. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's really any downside to do that, and you might feel like I think you might in fact get more mileage out of that content. I just wanted to run Lewis's question, and then before Frank gets back to the presentation. So the question from Lewis: for specific software like contract management software, which I would assume is sort of a workflow type software, should I be answering questions like, what's the risk in using contract management software? What's the best way to buy a new contract management software? Where does that fit in your taxonomy, Frank? Can you skip back to that slide where you showed the different categories of searches?
Here.
So that's more like the informational know-how type content, right?
Huh?
And so based on what you were saying, that's where you like to focus 80% or so of your effort or volume of content creation, right?
Correct. That's my preference, and that may not work. So somebody who's in the process of buying an ERP system or a contract management system, that may be more of a transactional sale. So your mix of informational to transactional may be different, but I still believe you should have more informational than transactional. Okay. Because this is what sets you apart from the people who are all about the sale. Like, if you're all transactional information and almost no high quality informational, then you're like the used car salesman of contract software at that point. So that's kind of my thought.
Yeah. Can you give an example or two of what transactional content looks like? Like just I'm looking at the slide and okay, go for it.
I'm actually curious about that.
Okay.
I would do a search on this. Let's not go down that route. I'm not going to do live Googling. In my opinion, transactional content is a sales page. It can be short or long form. You have a strong call to action. You are trying to sell that person right now, not trying to provide a backdrop of information for their edification and knowledge.
That's perfect. Okay. So that really gives some good context. So, Lewis, hopefully that's, I think that's a pretty good answer. That I think you're thinking in the right terms, and it's going to fit in that 80% informational category. Okay, Frank, how about we let you get back to your presentation?
I would say for Lewis that he needs to do both. I would do both. I don't know the magic mix, but the slam dunk is informational. Like what is contract management? what are contract management software risks? Boom, you have your blog post. What is content management software? And then Google pops up and says, content management software does this, and it's sourced from your site. You hit the simple no, and then it's like, buying contract management software now. And if the first multiple results are you, at that point, like that's the slam dunk of content marketing, and you win. So how close can you get to that? And it's a lot of work. But that's kind of the vision I would have of what full complete success at this would be. And if you get there part of the way, it probably still does very well for your business.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think of it as a sort of footprint. Like, how big is your marketing footprint? And when it gets big enough, what you're saying, Frank, I think is you just become the obvious choice, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, exactly. So so you have you. So at that point, literally, if you're the biggest footprint, obvious choice, like, you have so much going for you that the only way your competition can beat you at that point is by switching markets altogether or undercutting your price, at which point they're the discount provider, which actually works in your favor, because now not only are you the biggest choice, but you're the most expensive choice. That's something Philip talks about in his coursework for you guys. So that's it only gets better from there.
Yeah.
So okay.
Very good. Well, thanks for those questions, everybody. Frank, we'll let you get back to the presentation.
Awesome. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Is it big enough?
Yep, you're full screen. Good to go.
Okay. So I'm going to posit something else. And this, I think, balances very well with what Philip teaches in the book and the coursework. So in positioning, part of, if I wanted to use different phrasing, your business must be laser focused. I learned this years ago when I got into app development, because I did web before then, and I made iPhone apps and things, and that went okay for a little while. And so my website had a lot of iPhone app game stuff, like T-Mobile Sidekick, and literally my business, like web development contracts, dried up completely. And ironically, when I needed to restart that business because the app side, other people were being very successful and I was not, and I had to pivot, I actually had to remove that content from the website. The reason for this was that prospective customers didn't saw game development, and even though it has APIs and servers that do all sorts of multiplayer, like none of that mattered. It was games. Oh, you're a game person. Well, you don't do serious software. So I had to hide all that. That's something that you may have to do. But I've learned something. You as a person are allowed to have multiple interests. So the company needs to literally only do one, maybe two things if the two are closely related, in order to be trustworthy and credible. But you as an individual may have interests. So it is actually, if you write, we'll use Lewis's example, for example, if he sells contract management software, his company probably should be all about contract management software. But if he wanted to write on the blog about something off the wall, different, that blog post is probably not going to hurt his brand, because he as an individual is allowed to have multiple interests. And that becomes for someone who is interested in what your core is, it's just kind of a personal interest story sort of thing. But the power in that is you're allowed to test flight future ideas as a blog post and start seeing what sort of traction it gets to decide whether you want to. So if you're in contract management software and you are starting to wonder if maybe you need to go into more broad ERP software, you could write a blog post about how that is and start getting evidence based on what search activity is happening on that area. And you may not make a further mention of it for years or months or years. You may just leave it alone and never touch it. but it's a great way to experiment. So therefore blog. So let's talk about content investments. These are the 4 areas that you need to invest in over the long term. Any one of them are valuable in their own right, but long term you want to have them all. Experimental landing pages and the long tail. That's the blog post I just talked about. So this is where you experiment with content that you're not betting the farm on yet. So remember my example of investors don't go all in. This is exactly what that means on a practical level. I am going to experiment with multiple ideas over time. You need your serious business pages. So this is your sales page. This is your call to action. Things like your home page, the first class landing pages, your contact page, your team page. These are your transactional and bona fide, like we are serious and we are real content, and this makes your money. Then you need discoverable social proof. So this is when someone said, I think I want to do business with Frank's company or with Lewis' company or Phillips or Brian's or any of these companies. Let me go see, is this guy any good? Like, are people ticked off at this agency? Like, do they, hire shoddy work? And they start searching. They go back to the search engine and they start searching for information about you. So your LinkedIn, your Facebook, your everything. This is why we teach children not to post, pictures on social media that they're later going to regret. I mean, how many people have that college photo with drinking beer that they wish they hadn't actually been drinking on for a picture or not? I mean, discoverable proof. So you need to engineer this. So your LinkedIn profile, let's say you own a company. Your LinkedIn page is a landing page for your business. Your Twitter page is a landing page for your business. Your personal Facebook profile, if it's public, is a landing page for your business. You have to treat it like that. And I mean, you can be real. You don't have to be wearing the tie all the time, from the suit and tie icon there. But you need to think about the bigger picture of your social footprint as evidence, discoverable evidence of your bona fides. And then social media. I mean, yeah, if I write a blog post, I'm going to tweet about it. I'm going to go back and forth with, if I see something interesting, I'm going to reply on Twitter. I'm going to share on Facebook that I'm giving this interview. That interaction. So your friends and people who are in your natural circle can see what you're doing. And the search engine algorithms take that as evidence that you are legitimate. So it's actually very important for building the other side of the house, which is your long-term discoverability. And I'm very bullish on videos right now. I actually admitted to Philip last night that I have a little bit of a video studio and all these grand visions of doing a lot more content for my learning center, but it's a lot of work. But video, in my opinion, is the ultimate show don't tell. And what I mean by that is if I say I'm a great rail security guy, it means nothing. And that's exactly what my blog and what my sales content does. It means nothing by itself. And if it's well written, maybe it means something. They can read and tell for themselves. If someone else says, Frank is the go-to web application security person and you should talk with him, that's a referral and that's gold. I win at that point. I mean, I'll probably end up helping this person. But I can't control the referral. But video is different. If someone watches a 20-minute conference talk of me talking about application security for developers, they can tell for themselves whether or not they believe I know what I'm talking about. And so the video is is a way is like referrals for actual, and by the time someone's watched your video of your conference talk and 2 and 3 of them and read your blog, it's not a sales process anymore. It is a just having a conversation and trying to figure out how you can help them. And don't skip on your meta tags. So this is one of my tricks I like. So people don't like to see anonymous content where they're not sure who it is or how to contact. It turns out you can do specific call to actions in your meta tag, because that is what shows up before someone discovers your website. So I'll put my phone number in there. So if someone wants to call me, and usually they read the website too, but that can stand out in a sea of content that is harder to visually tell whether this is a someone you can contact or not. Market tests, I talked a little bit earlier about writing blogs. So a good book, actually, there's a couple that I recommend. I don't have them on the slides. Value Proposition Design by Alexander Osterwald is one that's been going around for several years. The Startup Owner's Manual is another. And what these books will teach you about doing is iterating on your value proposition, iterating on your customer discovery process for your startup. And that's exactly what you need to do with your content. So if you're working, you have a theory about what someone wants to buy, a service that is valuable, you test it in the marketplace, you write content, you write blog posts, and you want to iterate on those things. So don't say, I am this kind of developer necessarily. So you want to be continuing in iteratively improving and testing. And then on referrals, I talked earlier about how in my experience, I have very, very, very few referrals from customers to other customers. I have a couple of theories why this is. I had one client tell me to my face that he wouldn't refer me because he was afraid that I would get so busy that I wouldn't be able to help him anymore. And I was like, hey, at least he's being honest. Others, they don't know anyone else who needs my services. When you're so specifically niched, it is my experience that your clients aren't necessarily in touch with other ideal clients of yours, which is a little bit different than if you're in a vertical market. Things that have worked very well are referrals from other developers. Either they're too busy or they hear that there's a security problem and they're like, oh, you have a security problem, you need to talk to these guys. That is, those are your go-tos. And that dovetails into trustworthiness and generosity. So one way to build that sort of referral network that's not transactional in nature. It's not because you've done work for someone and said, oh, by the way, if you like my services, can you tell me who else could use my services? That always seemed very shallow to me. This is where things, yes. I thought I heard something. Okay. This is where things like becoming involved in your local meetup community can help. So if you go once, you're a guest. If you go twice, you're regular. If you go 3 or more times, you're consistent. If you go every single month for a year, you're a trustworthy one. You are seen as trustworthy, and 2, you are seen as a pillar of the community. So that consistency is good. And generosity. So do you volunteer to run the meetup, to help someone who's looking for a job, make contacts? And I actually use the word generosity specifically because you want to give to your communities. And I don't use the word give back. I mean, give back is good, but that implies that you're doing it because something gave to you. In this case, You want to enter a community and start becoming generous. And then over time, and this is not a trick. This is not like, let me trick these people. Over time, you become trustworthy and generous, and people know who you are. They know what you do, and it's very natural for them to make a referral for that thing that you do. And thanks. So this is the end of my prepared slides. We can definitely jump around or work on questions.
So, Frank, that was awesome. Thank you. Tell you what, let me ask just a few questions. Thanks, William. Let me ask a few questions while folks are maybe typing their questions into the chat box or getting their thoughts together. I hope you will have questions, but I'll start with a few. The whole peer referrals thing is super interesting to me, Frank. So it seems like, when you're talking about generosity, you just kind of, you show up, you continue to show up over the long term. That's led by your vision, which you talked about earlier, right? Like, I think the question people will have is like, okay, I can show up and be generous, but about what? Like, does that mean that I, bring donuts to the meetup, or I guess talk a little bit
that
more
helps.
about...
Everyone likes donuts and pizza, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. But is that the right investment? Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, could you talk a little more about that? Because I think that's a critical thing that you've identified, is this idea of showing up. Like, that's my language for it, is how are you going to show up for the people you're trying to help? And you're saying who you show up for might be your peers just as much as the people who actually hire you, or even more so, you might show up for your peers.
Yes, and that's one of those things that's been my experience. I started going to the Atlanta Ruby users meetup, and within a couple of years, I accidentally officially became an organizer.
Uh-huh.
I started, and it's just been a wonderful community. But it started as, hey, I'll go. Hey, this is fun. I'll continue to go. I start videoing it. I start publishing the videos. Other people get jobs because their videos are showing up on YouTube. And so when they go to be interviewed, and then just like one thing leads to another. And because people know who I am and they know that I care about security, maybe that's the part that it's not so easy to duplicate. Like, I got the security bug like 2005 and earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and I haven't let go. So I owned a web hosting company. I saw the shady shit going down, like people trying to social fish me and stuff. And I was just graduating college right at that time, sold it. I'm like, well, I just sold a business. That's pretty cool for someone the week before graduating college. Well, I could go get a job right now, but I went back to grad school. I'm like, let me do this information security thing. And I guess it kind of went from there. So the thing, though, is for what I do, there was and is no market. The thing where I may be crazy is that I still didn't take like a job interview with Microsoft, despite my dad's telling me, my singular dad, I'm sorry, telling me to.
Yeah.
Because I was like, but that sucks. I don't want to sell security firewall appliances for Microsoft networks. Like, that's not interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to go make websites because no one does security for websites. But since no one buys security for websites that I could find, I'm just going to start making websites and say security is something important for the making of the websites. And it's like 7 hard, long years of doing what you have to do to make money and being like, I'll write your PHP, I'll do your VB.NET, SQL Server thing, to the, like, we are a Ruby on Rails shop. So I went through at least 2 or 3 years of, like, we are a Rails shop, we do Rails. And finally, after long and hard, I was able to say, we are a security company.
Okay.
And I'm not suggesting people take that approach, but I guess my experience has sort of been, it's come from that.
Yeah, right. Okay, so
But that may not answer your question. I just realized after I finished that little.
Well, it's related, which is in the background, there was always a vision of where you wanted to be as
Yes.
maybe not as an expert, but as someone who was creating this result of more secure Rails apps or more secure websites. When you were talking about like how actually what you do at the peer-to-peer level, it sounds like it totally could be just bringing donuts.
It
or
really
pizza.
could. Yeah.
It could be a very humble sort of contribution, but as long as you're consistent about it, you start to build those connections with your peers who then refer you when they need that kind of expert.
Mm-hmm. I fundamentally believe on sort of so I'm a Christian, so a lot of my worldview comes from that. As a viewpoint in the scriptures, it teaches that he who wants to, he who wants to be the most is going to basically to be nothing. It's the person who's the humblest, the most giving, that is ultimately I don't want to say rewarded by God, but like it is better to be the least, the person who brings the donut, than to be the person who is, I'm in charge.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that's good wisdom.
And one of my other questions was about confidence. Like, I think this shows up a lot with content marketing, and then I want to open it up for other people to ask questions. Sorry to hog Frank here, everybody, but I want to hear from you, Frank. What your confidence level like probably is higher than average, I'm guessing, because who starts a business in college? Not that many people, and I think there's some confidence that it takes to do that. Maybe it's just in your blood, but when people sit down to write content marketing, here's what happens in their head. They're like, well, I'm not an established known expert. Who am I to write this blog article telling people how to do X? Did you face that? It's okay if you didn't. Like, I've met some people who they don't have confidence problems.
I've definitely struggled with how to write well.
Sure.
That's a lesson.
That's part of it.
And it's evolved over time.
Did you ever say to yourself, who am I to be giving advice about this?
I probably should have a few times in hindsight. One substitute for actual expertise is being a good research paper writer.
True. Yes.
So, for example, if you're able to compile the information and cite authoritative sources, then in a very real and very academically rigorous way, you are providing expert advice.
Right. You're sort of curating there instead of being the original source.
And so I think that's a valid approach. If someone is not yet comfortable saying, based on my experience, you can say, hey, this really matters to me, and cite all your sources. And no critic can point at you and say that you are not being honest if you go that way.
Good point. I'm going to shut up for a minute, and anyone who's got questions, please feel free to just sort of unmute yourself and go for it.
Hello, Frank.
Can
you hear me?
A little bit. I'll listen very carefully.
Leo. Hi, Philip.
Hey, Leo.
I have a question for you, Frank. Do you do any content promotion? After, for example, you mentioned that you write some experimental blogs. Do you try to promote them in some way or rank them high? How people are discovering this through search?
Okay. Yes, but not as much as you think. I probably, if I wrote a new blog post just now, I'd probably tweet about it. So that's a natural link. And I would probably share it on Facebook. And that may or may not be a link depending on, I don't tend to publish, I might not post everything to Facebook because my grandmother's on Facebook. She probably wants to know that I'm going to be on a internet show. She doesn't really know the difference between a podcast and TV, but she probably doesn't want to know about some technical article that doesn't know about. but Twitter's good, and that is the inbound link. And it depends on if I haven't really bought ads for anything. I may have tried it once or twice on a dare, but I mean, because it wasn't that much money, but it's not effective, or at least my experimentation with it was not effective. It depends on your goal. If you want the content to be surfaced now, right now, you have to promote. If you want the content to be discovered on the long tail, I mean, we're talking stuff that may be discovered 5-6 years from now, but because this is about being the long game, not the short game, then it really doesn't matter. As long as it's crawlable by Google and you have good page structure, you have a good title, you have good, like you will get 10s to 50s of hits on it just naturally. And if you have a big enough body about that, the ironic thing is Google says, wow, this website is trustworthy. It's been around for a while. It has a editorial history of content. So now when you publish the thing that really matters, you are given a boost over your competition that doesn't have that momentum.
Okay, thank you. Did you do anything special at the beginning to build that authority for your main site? Is it important in your opinion?
I had a Google PageRank 9 on rietta.com/robogen, which was a program I wrote to learn how to program in C++ when I was a teenager, and that was published in, I wrote 3 shareware applications, and this was in the 90s. And one of the things about the shareware ecosystem at the time was that it was a lot of links to sites. So when PageRank first hit, when you were a shareware site, you could have a very high PageRank based upon those inbound links. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not an SEO. I'm not 100% sure how to duplicate that effect today.
So Frank, you're saying there were like, I remember those days, there were like dozens of shareware sites that were just indexes of shareware that would point back to the author's site or the download site where that's what you're talking about. You had a bunch of inbound links from shareware. Okay.
So I'm sorry, I don't know how to replicate that in today's ecosystem.
And so are you also saying that that's part of what maybe helped you get a head start or kind of a jump
I
start?
really think it is.
Okay.
I really think it is. Because what usually happens when I set up a microsite, I'll link to it from the blog on my main site, and that microsite will pop up in the rankings a lot faster than what I think is the normal experience.
The microsite would be like you
like
referenced
AtlantaRubyDeveloper.com. So it's all about programming Ruby for startups as opposed to the bigger picture. I own like 30 domains. I probably actively use 3 of them. It's a bad habit. I actually bought appsec.pro just so I could put my picture on it, but I haven't used it for anything either.
Hey, can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Please do.
Okay. This is Annie. Firstly, I was wondering how you leverage these microsites into your main brand, both SEO-wise and building thought leadership-wise. Like, do people know it's all the same you? And I have another question after that.
I don't hide that it's the same me. I guess I've only done this a few times, so it's not like I have dozens and dozens of them. But so if we go look at, and I desperately need to update this website. It's because it's moved away from being the focus. It's kind of been left alone a little bit. Yeah. Oh, wow. So yeah, so my average time on this page is over 3 minutes. But I used to have a lot more visitors, so that shows, and the bounce rate has gone up quite a lot. But you'll notice it's Ruby Development Service by Rietta. Rietta, if you click on this, so no, it's not hidden.
So this is like a specific service offering that targets some of your regular audience?
That is my idea. So the concept is that someone searching for this type of Ruby development probably doesn't need to be left confused by a bunch of security talk that is maybe on the main site, because that's not where they are.
Okay, got it.
So that's one way to not have, again, it's like your landing pages experiments. So when someone actually lands on a serious business landing page, you do actually want it to be all about that serious business. Everything else just bolsters either it be you having the authority to, and let me show you actually why blogging helps authority. Let's see, ham radio encryption. So I wrote a authentication without encryption for ham radio. Link from Reddit, another link from Reddit, link from this site. This is because over time, this idea was discovered and it's just naturally talked about. So even though this content, my ham radio hobbies never made me a penny, by definition, it's not supposed to. I actually wrote this presentation in 2004. So I was an undergrad student when I gave it to my ham radio club, and then I turned it into a blog post. And so that helps over time. Again, it's the long game. So it's hard to say how to replicate this in a shorter period of time. I'm sorry. But okay, your next question.
Well, just to follow up on that, so like I have another blog that has very little to nothing to do with my business that I do just for fun. Mm-hmm. And so you're saying like use my real name on that and it will help me build authority in general?
Absolutely. And I think if as your blog builds authority, your blog is a source of authority for your serious business content. Hey, check out what we're looking for. It's a throwaway blog, or it's not looking for. Check out this thing I've been working on for work. I'm really excited. My team is really awesome about it. You know, here's a link to a video. Here's a link to, you know, this content page. And one, if your friends or family or normal audience discovers it, it's not horrible. You're just proud of your work. And if you're, but to the search engine, it can't tell the difference between this as an endorsement, one sort of endorsement versus another. So some of that authority will flow to your serious business content.
Cool. I didn't think about that. Okay. So my other question is, both for me and my clients whom I advise, a lot of people don't have the real gumption to do a steady blog as well as they should. So, for instance, I'm thinking about doing like more like white papers or, you know, like expertise articles when I can manage it on my website. And I often tell my clients to do that too if I know they're not going to keep up a blog. What do you think about that?
I think is an excellent strategy. The thing that and I haven't blogged this month. I need to do maybe 2 months. I need to do this too. So we all fall into this trap. The one thing I think you give up, there's another aspect of having an on-domain blog which helps a site more, and that is the recency boost. So the more recent the content, the more authority the site has for a period of time. So the white paper approach is awesome, and I'm not sure that I think it would search engine wise have the same impact as in a long form blog that is published on an irregular basis. I think it would behave the same way because you have a content, but then you don't have new content for 4 months. But that content is long form. So one of the signals, so when we were at my site a minute ago, it was telling me the average reader was 3.5 minutes. Well, that's a strong signal to Google. Hey, they saw a result, they clicked on it, and then they were there for 3, 4, 5 minutes before they came back. That meant that must have been really good content. So we're going to rank that more highly. So yeah, I think it is very valuable.
Cool, thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, I would like another question.
Go for it.
If I may. Frank, did you try to do any blog posts? Guest blog posts, sorry.
I am not sure. No, I have never tried. I have never had the free time to go try to do guest blog posting. And the only times people have offered to guest blog post on my site, I got a really kind of scuzzy feeling about it, and so I just turned them down. But I think that probably is legitimate, especially if it's a big name. Now, if CNET said, hey, Frank, would you write for us? I probably would say yes, just as an example, but that hasn't been my experience yet.
Okay, thank you.
On that note, if you can remember, Frank, what was the time difference between, let me rephrase that. How long did it take to get the kind of inbound lead generation results that you talked about earlier, where someone's essentially made up their mind to hire you before they even call? When's the first time that you remember that happening? And
Within the
roughly,
last few years.
right. Roughly how long did it take to kind of build up to that point?
On the Ruby side, actually on Atlanta Ruby developer, not super long. So I started teaching, I got into Rails development. So let me backtrack a little bit. The very first time it happened was back in the Nobody Knows Your Dog days. And that was when, like, in a very short period of time, I got, as just a kid, I got this work from like Verizon Wireless and Sprint PCS and Cox Business Services, like all back to back to back. And that was just, hey, I'm a web designer in Atlanta. But that was ancient history.
Yeah,
more recently,
that's a fantastic example of the content marketing everybody remembers and wishes was still true when the internet was a lot less noisy and crowded.
Yeah. Yeah, looking back, that's like ridiculous, but hey, that's the way it was. 2011, I decided that I wanted to do this. Yeah, let's use Atlanta Ruby developer as an example. I was doing some other work and I was like, man, this is just not working. I was actually part of the ATDC, which is a startup incubator, working on something called SQL Converter at the time, which was one of my shareware products that I had thought might turn into a real company. And so I started working on it more. And then I learned that it made a lot better product than a company, because people would buy it for $100 and then I literally would never hear from them again. So there was no follow-up. There was no relationship. There was no service. It was just like, found the page, gave you $100, which sounds really fun, but it's a really lonely existence to only ever have like technical support questions and like nothing ongoing.
Yeah.
So I did 3 Rails sites. I taught myself Rails and did 3 Rails sites in like a 3-month period.
Mm-hmm.
I did some stuff kind of the normal way. I said, hey, Atlanta Ruby developer's not been registered. I remember Atlanta Web Host was like, that was really great. So I registered that. And then as I shared with you yesterday, I did a couple things. So I registered that in January of 2012. I think if I looked at who is, it's probably early in January. Like, if I recall right, I was getting good leads by March, and by about August, or maybe it was the next year, I was getting more like, let's have lunch and talk about how, and this was the startup market. This wasn't the security market that I'm finally in now. This was, I have an idea and Rails is awesome. And wow, you're really qualified. We want to work with you. It was about a year, but that was coming from a non-zero base. So
yeah.
But I bet most people aren't coming from zero actually. So one thing that does still work, though it's changed a little bit. One thing I shared with Philip last night, and I don't remember if I shared it at the start. So with Atlanta Ruby developer, at the time, there was something called authorship, which was a markup that you could do for, like, when you wrote editorial content, you could have your author photo. I used that markup on the site, and I also used locality indicators. So, for example, the domain name, Atlanta Ruby Developer, registered with Google Maps. Atlanta Ruby Developer is at this address. Did the authorship, and that gave me 2 things. One, not only did Google give me a recency boost because it was a new site, it gave me a locality boost because when someone searches for frozen yogurt and they live in New York, they're looking for frozen yogurt in New York. So it doesn't matter if they type New York frozen yogurt, Google knows. The same way with Ruby. So it got to where if someone was anywhere in the metro Atlanta area, which is huge, or even in kind of the southeastern region because of locality things, Google was going to show my Ruby developer site before it showed Philip's Ruby developer site in Oregon. So I was able to get a lot of good results. And then with the authorship, they searched for a Ruby developer. I was the second result with my picture. And then 2 results down was my business partner's picture.
That's pretty incredible for trust.
So, and that doesn't quite exist like that anymore, but the principle still works.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions? We've got a few minutes left, and if there are no other questions from the audience, I'm going to go into a lightning round of my own questions with Frank. But questions.
Anybody? So I think the short answer is, for a lot of these questions, this is back to the investor mindset. So this strategy doesn't work if you need a gig right now. You have to use other strategies at that point.
Absolutely. All right, here's the lightning round. I've got a few questions that I wrote notes on.
Okay.
So you've got content. We talked a lot about that. You talked about how sometimes that turns into leads. What's the process? Do you have like a call to action? Contact me, hire me? You know, what does that look like? Maybe you could just show us on your website.
Actually, let's look. It didn't work quite as well as I hoped. Oh no, it was there. It was there. But it's now at the top.
Yeah. Okay.
So I just, oh, by the way, back to the Atlanta Ruby, I've been contacted by government agencies. I've been hired by government agencies that had Rails apps. I've been contacted by federal agencies looking to have bids on IT systems. So there's thoughts that, so yeah, this is a great example. This is not a high trafficked blog post. The bounce rate's pretty decent though, 80%. So people read it. Yeah. As you get to the bottom, my call to action on this stuff is literally just, here's who I am. You can follow me on Twitter. You can tweet. At some points it has contents. I've actually, it didn't quite work out. I actually was contacted about a significant security project by someone who a year or two after someone read this article and they remembered, oh, let me go back and reach out. So another thing that I've run into, especially on the OpenSSL one, is I've run into situations where people either had used my so again, the blog is not super high traffic. I mean, if I were monetizing the blog directly, I mean, I would be poor.
Well, you are monetizing it directly through your services, but yeah, I see what you mean, not through ad traffic. So what do people do? Like, how often do they call versus do they just dig up an email address, or do they fill out a contact form on your site? What's the actual path?
It's everything. I've had people tweet me. I've had people like find me through something else. I've had people click through to the contact page right here and fill it out. Like every way that people contact you, someone has done.
Okay.
For a while, I had a little chat widget on the site, and that was actually used sometimes too.
Earlier, you mentioned a 40% conversion rate. Can you?
Yeah, that was kind of a made-up number. That was for illustrative purposes.
No, that's fine. But let's say it's close to that. What does that mean? Like 40% of site visitors contact you, or what does that really mean?
Yeah, that means that if you have a microsite that only attracts 10 people, but those 10 people are hyper motivated to read every page for your site, and 4 of them contact you, that could represent $100,000 in business. You don't need
Yeah.
Hundreds. You don't need as much traffic as you think.
Absolutely. Can you, again, just for folks who are listening to this and want to see what your microsite looks like, what's the URL again to the Atlanta?
And it's old. It's embarrassing, but it's atlantarubydeveloper.com.
Okay.
That's one of the main ones.
atlantarubydeveloper.com. And at a point that was performing very well.
Exactly.
When you talk about blogging about like personal interest stuff, do you do that on the business blog or do you have a personal blog that's separate?
I just have one blog.
Okay.
Personally.
Great. You talked about engineering proof. I just want to say I love that term. Never heard anybody quite put it together that way. Proof doesn't just fall in your lap. You have to make it happen, right? You have to go out and ask clients for testimonials, or you're talking about even a more broad view of like your LinkedIn page. Make that function as a landing page. I love that. Just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you.
With video,
by the way, I've only ever had one project find me through LinkedIn, but it was a big one. And it worked. Somebody, I won't use names, went to seek out an investment in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And they were told, wow, you have a really great lifestyle business, but if you really wanted this to be something, you need to find some Rails developers. So the moment he hit his plane, landed back in Atlanta, he called his web developer saying, we need Rails developers, who went on LinkedIn, and it went from there.
Nice. With video, do you do transcripts too, so that they are more discoverable by Google? Or
I have not done transcripts, but I've usually manually written a description. So a video is a landing page. A blog post is a landing page. Yeah. So for example, if I do Ruby on Rails data breach, let's see if this does what I think it's going to do. See, results change on you. So the moment you think you remember it, let me cheat and just go to the videos listing.
Okay.
So this is a landing page. It has a description. It's discoverable. Someone can choose to watch it. And so you have to think about it that way. And you can also work in the links to the relevant things.
I think that's an important mindset thing, is like everything is a landing page, in that if you have one sort of next step in mind for that piece of content, that blog post, that video, then it starts to function like a landing page. If conference talks are not an option and people want to use the power of video, so I mean, it's ideal to be videoed up on stage at a conference, being the expert on whatever, right? But what if like travel's not an option, or
buy your own camera? This is what I did actually.
Okay.
Buy your own camera, have a topic you care about, and do meetup presentations.
Okay.
On the video, no one can tell whether or not this was a conference or a meetup.
Got it. Okay.
That's one trick.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, obviously, to do that well, let me give a couple of quick. Actually, let me change that advice slightly. Don't buy a camera if your phone can record 45 minutes at a time, but absolutely buy a microphone or use another phone near to you to record the audio and combine the audio and the video in post-production so it sounds clear and is easy to understand, at which point you have a well-produced video as opposed to having just run your camera.
Love that. I'll add to it. Film school students often don't know how to price their services very well. And so they can be a great sort of underpriced value for getting stuff like that done. If the whole idea of dealing with the tech yourself is not appealing, you could, I think, a couple $100 and have a film school student do it, right?
Yeah, I agree. That's probably a pretty good idea. I was a technical geek, so I actually enjoyed the challenge of learning how to do a little video stuff on the side. But yeah, that's probably not realistic for most people. And I don't recommend, because you buy the camera and you're like, crap, it sounds like junk. Well, I need a Tascam DR40 audio recorder. Okay, let me get that. The next thing you know, I have a toy chest full of camera gear and stuff back there. And it's like, what am I doing with this? I'm a software guy.
Yeah, you're $900 into video equipment. Yeah. Well, Frank, we're out of time.
Okay.
This has been great. Can you just let folks know, like, if they want to sort of copy what you've done or see what you're up to or learn more, what should they do?
Well, I think most people know what my website is. We've definitely talked about it enough. I'm on Twitter, Frank Rietta. Feel free to say hi, or we'll do the whole mutual follow thing. And let me know if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer. I like startups. I like, the whole entrepreneurship thing. And so, yeah, just say hi, and we'll go from there. And Philip, I wanted to say thank you for this opportunity. It's like, I sent you that email. I was like, honestly asking a question. And the next thing you're like, you don't need my help. Do you want to be a guest? I'm like, no, like, it's a little scary. So
you did great. This has been such valuable information. Thanks again. Thanks for everybody who attended and contributed questions. Really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm sure this information is going to make something better in your business. So with that, I'm just going to hang up on everybody. So thank you. Bye for now.